So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services. We refined the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, it's always important reading these prophets in line with revelation known as Galah, and then what the Hamashiach ben Yosef said during the time that Mitchayahu the 24th chapter was recorded. And these chapters of the known as New Testament, they were not truly recorded as New Testament. They were simply completions of existing manuscripts of the prophets. So, the understanding is the Ark of the Covenant was not in the Second Temple, and the Ark of the Covenant during this period of time was in the cave of Yirmeyahu during the time of the Babylonian invasion. So there was a very dark period of time of the nation where the only scripture they had was the Torah, and unfortunately at that time had many takanot and maasim mixed with it, and the promises of the prophets. So for many centuries the nation relied only in these pieces of manuscripts and the prophecies of these prophets previously. So then, when the Hamashiach ben Yosef came, he became the very light of Yod-He Vav-He. Now, the light is not the Hamashiach ben Yosef. Very important point, because the light is the Torah. The light is the understandings of the prophets, because they describe situations that Yod-He Vav-He was involved with. Now, the light comes from the understanding of the period of time that the nation did not have the presence of Yod-He Vav-He through his holy prophets. So the obscurity was so great that when the Torah was explained, as it was before during the First Temple period, the discrepancy of understanding was so great from the time of the Hamashiach ben Yosef in the First Temple period that obviously any Torah spoken clearly would be obviously perceived as a great light. But it wasn't the Hamashiach ben Yosef doing it. So the presence of Yod-He Vav-He gives us few clues of what he explains in Mitchayahu the 24th chapter. The Hamashiach ben Yosef is explaining situations of the kingdom to come, or the government. So the understanding of Yod-He Vav-He through the Hamashiach ben Yosef explains completion of the autumn feast. And because they were so concerned with Yod-He Vav-He as a king or melech, then the Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining that this was not truly the time for these particular situations. So Galah, Revelation, then became lined up with Ezekiel. So, the understanding that Hamashiach ben Yosef was trying to explain was the period of time where the people were so awaiting for the kingdom. It was simply a transition from Vaikra. So then, what is Vaikra, the 22nd verse? When Hamashiach ben Yosef first came, the section of the spring feast then was completed. There was a period that the teachings of the Torah related with Yod He Vav He and his holy feasts. These were then completed. Now the 22nd verse of the 23rd chapter of Vaikra, it is precisely the time of the Gentiles, prior of the coming of the autumn feast. Now people don't understand these basic situations because they simply don't understand the kingdom of Yod He Vav He and what he meant by kingdom. So, the Hamashiach ben Yosef, while he was involved with his people at the time, he was explaining that the wishes of the people regarding the kingdom, they were not yet. So why did he say such a thing? Why did he simply mention that it was not the time? There are reasons. What are these reasons? Can a people or a group of people force a certain situation? No. They cannot. They tried, it didn't work. They tried previously, it didn't work. Because there is a time of every purpose under heaven. So the Hebrew text is very wealthy, quote unquote, the word wealthy, because gives us step by step formation, not only, for instance, of the tribe of Yehuda, from where the holy instructions came, mostly, and those people who maintained the holy instructions, but the inclusion of the understanding of other Hebrews, not related particularly with the tribe of Yehuda. So not every Hebrew is from the tribe of Yehuda. Understandably, there are 12 tribes. So when people are saying, oh, that person is Jewish but doesn't practice. Now, have you ever asked this person what tribe this person is from? There is only a tribe related with the tribe of Yehuda. And not every tribe had the task of securing the holy oracles. Many of the Hebrews of the time, they were regular workers. They were doing the regular work, and they were, during the time of the Shabbat, they were coming around, so they would listen the holy instructions being taught. Now, it is truly scandalous when people without knowledge points the finger at those quote-unquote Jewish And they say, oh, that person doesn't practice. It may not be a Jewish from the tribe of Yehuda. A particular person is obviously from another tribe. As important as Yehuda, but a person has other tasks in life. So sometimes we are judgmental and we don't even understand why. Now, there are some obligations of each Hebrew person should be concerned with. The holy feasts, for instance, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh has said very precisely, every male should participate. And those who are not citizens, there are some exclusions that the Torah provides. Other than these, people gather around and they listen of the elders and those who are studying and explaining the holy instructions, and then people come around and they learn it. But then afterwards, they resume their duties. So, the Hamashiach ben Yosef was as Daniel, Ezekiel, Yirmeyahu, Yeshayahu. He was from this kind of lineage. He was not a superman as what Moses had said, when this prophet comes, listen. Now, Moses didn't say there's going to be a supernatural person. No, he says he's going to be like yourselves. He's from amongst the people. Now, the main question is, did the Hamashiach ben Yosef give clear understandings of the future of the nations? Yes, he did. The Hamashiach ben Yosef said precisely what the prophet said previously. He didn't deviate from those. Now, during the time of the Hamashiach, the only distinction was he had more details after the prophets prophesied. They had the history. So when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was talking about, for instance, and then the nations, that they shall fight against each other, that they are going to murder each other. There is a reason why he was saying this. Some of the layers of the translation of the original manuscripts. Now comes the point of understanding the Hebrew text. We are talking about logic. We are not talking about spiritual nonsense. Logic, simply logic. The Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining steps of formation. Daniel, for instance, was the minister of economy. Now, he was from the tribe of Dan. Was he truly? Do we have evidence? So these are important questions, because most of the life of Daniel the prophet was related with the kingdom of the Gentiles. Now, the Hebrew language by nature is an action language. Now, explaining situations of the future in an abstract form truly is not part of the original form, the way the Hebrew language was developed. So there were understandings of the future that only the Hebrews could understand. A normal person wouldn't have a clue. That's why the translation of Galah or Revelation is so confusing. It shows from the chronological order of the manuscripts, any person with basic knowledge of Hebrew, you glanced at it and say, this is out of order. Now, it's not taking the divinity of the manuscripts from it or from them. It's simply a person that put together had no clue what they were doing. Person or persons. Now, does it take the divinity away? Each person should answer it. But certainly, Yod-He Vav-He Yeshua cannot be mixed with Shaphat. And this is what then Galah is repleted with. Why? Because the translator didn't understand. It's obvious. Now, there were spiritual movements during the time of the Hamashiach ben Yosef, during the time of Shaliach Shaul, known as Paul, and Shimon, known as Peter, and then later on the Shilishim, those who were sent. And those who were sent, each of them had knowledge of the original manuscripts. It is a requirement. So then, how are you going to prove this? Romans. Let's read Romans. Now, Romans, we find a person by the name Shaul. Sometimes this person is very controversial in some of the understandings because the translator did not understand the foundation of the content Shaliach Shaul was explaining. Now comes other layers mixed with it. Some of these Hebrews, they were far away from Jerusalem, because Jerusalem, unfortunately, was very crowded. The nation was not truly what they experienced during the first temple period. And many of these Hebrews have chosen to live elsewhere. Now, there are elders, but these elders, they must constantly become linked with the elders from Jerusalem, because Yod-He Vav-He has chosen this way. Every time there is a feast, every male is required to go to Jerusalem and participate, because Yod-He Vav-He has a word. Now, the word he is explaining is not more laws from Vaikra or Devraim. What was given, it was given. What was revealed were bits and pieces of what the prophets said previously. Continuations. This was then Galad, was revealed. And the information then was relayed from Jerusalem and other areas where these Hebrews were found. Now the Cilician, they had to have knowledge. So Romans 12. Let's take a glance at it, because we have to have the knowledge of Hebrew. We have to have a knowledge of the Greco-Roman society of the time. We have to have the knowledge of the Greco people of the time. Was then the Greco language important? It was as important as English is for the market today. So when people are seriously study the Holy Instructions and they don't understand English, it is a bit unique. And the word unique translates, this person has not much understanding of the trade intricacies. So then later on in Gala, as it was important the Greco language and the Greco trade, so the scripture is geared towards certain lines of understanding of trade, explaining the prophecies in the future. Now, when people have only the knowledge of tabernacling, is it important? It is. You have to have the knowledge of trade. You have to have the knowledge of military. And not knowing the English language, not knowing the Greco language as a midpoint, as a trade line of understanding, then how can they explain Gala? And then explaining Gala without knowing Hebrew. So the Hamashiach ben Yosef was extremely knowledgeable of the Torah and the prophets. He simply indicated that the spring feast from this point in history was then completed. They had completed the spring feast. Now came a time for Vaikra, 23rd chapter, 22nd verse. He's explaining what it meant in the spiritual understanding. Don't cut the corners of the field, but leave those for the Gentiles. So the holy presence of the divinity was then set in a world through his people. And then comes later on, this time of the 22nd verse has ended. It was granted in a period of time of the restoration of tabernacling, and then the autumn feast, and then completes this age. Now there are intricacies of tabernacling, trade, and military. Each of these are very important. We can say that tabernacling is more important than trade. We can say that the military is more important than tabernacling, or then tabernacle is more important than the understanding of these both put together as explained portion of it in Daniel. So the translation, for instance, of Shaul, known as Paul, 12th chapter, very important piece of information. Then Shaliach Shaul, he was from the tribe of Benjamin. Try to understand it. He was not from the tribe of Yehuda. Isn't that interesting? But he had the knowledge, and he was mightily used. Yet, he was making a reference of prophets, speaking of what he was saying content-wise centuries before. So though he was a shaliach, he was the sent, yet he didn't deviate from what the prophets prophesied previously. That's the main reason why he said, "I plead with you therefore, my brothers, by the mercies of Yod-He Vav-He." Now he's talking an understanding of Galah. So Yod-He Vav-He Galah. In Aramaic, the translation, you find sections where there is Elohim. Elohim is a generic name, equivalent as Lord in English. And via the content, then we understand that Yod-He Vav-He is involved. That you present your bodies a living sacrifice. Now, that's not talking about sacrifice the point of slaughtering. He's talking about prioritizing or making priority. What was the priority of the time? Understanding that the spring feast was completed. Set apart, meaning that the people who were then from the lineage, these were the original people that though they were far away from Jerusalem, there were developments taking place. And these people were informed. But they were informed in such a way that did not jeopardize what the prophets said previously. And in order for us to maintain the integrity of the scripture, we must understand Hebrew. Otherwise, people start inventing situations, and then when we maintained a certain level of knowledge from the original manuscript, we say what people are saying simply doesn't line up. Pure inventions. So, and then he said, "And be not conformed to this world." So, what Shaliach Shaul is explaining? Shaliach Shaul is hearing the people. Because you can't give an order if you don't have a reason for the order. Did he not say that he had the authority from the scripture and he was a shaliach sent with a certain type of spiritual authority over the people, though he was from the tribe of Benjamin? But he knew the scripture, and he didn't deviate from the prophets. So, what did he say? And be not conformed to this world. So what the people wanted and what Shaliach Shaul heard them saying, they were conformed to this world. Their understanding, their thinking, what Shaliach Shaul was listening to people. And then obviously he said, don't be conformed to this world. These understandings of you people, it doesn't make any sense. And he continues, but you then be transformed by the renovation of your minds. How do you renovate your mind? He's not talking about the Spirit. He's talking about the knowledge of the Torah, the Tanakh, the Scriptures, the precise sections of the prophets. What he's saying is, you people, they were far away from Yerushalayim, and Shaliach Shaul was bringing fresh information. So it's an update, similarly as the computer today. However, it's not a substitution. You can't take a portion of the holy instructions or the prophets and then substitute with another portion. No, those are completed. But then people, they want in a certain way, they understand in a certain way. Then Shaliach Shaul said, but renew your mind. That's where the ability of gathering knowledge is then involved with the presence of Yod He Vav He. Shaliach Shaul, known as Paul, brought the presence of Yod He Vav He in the midst of them. Now, was he talking of kingdom? Not truly, primarily. People were so far away from the basic understanding of their own language and their own scripture, the Tanakh, the Torah, they were so far away from it. He couldn't have gone so far in explaining Yeshayahu, the 65th, 66th chapter. They wouldn't understand. Because the normal factor is they were not knowledgeable enough until they reached this level. So then what Shaliach Shaul is saying is, no, gotta renew your mind. You people don't have enough knowledge of what's going on at this point in time. This is what he's saying in other words. Now, people have a tendency when, renew your mind, they think it's by osmosis. You put the Torah, the holy Megillah of Torah, and you kind of, go around with it as if your mind could pick up, and it doesn't work this way. That's why Yod He Vav He said through Moses, teach your children diligently every word of this Torah, because later on in life they would be involved with it in a more familiar understanding. And then people that came from other places, they never were exposed with the holy instructions. They didn't understand ever since they were children. They were brought up in pagan rituals, pagan traditions, and then as I snap a finger, then they want to become spiritual. And Shaliach Shaul, no, it's not the way it works. But firstly, renew your mind. Study the Torah, study the language. Now, understanding the Torah, you have understanding Hebrew. And then later on, layer by layer, you begin to educate your mind in the influx of information and events that then the very Yod He Vav He helps you organize in your mind. Now, if we don't study it, we don't spend time in it, we don't write it, we don't read, how are we going to explain Galah later on? So the Hamashiach ben Yosef is not talking primarily of the kingdom. He's talking primarily of renewing their minds. Because the Hamashiach is always reminding people what was recorded. What was recorded. what was recorded, and it said this way, it was recorded this way. What do you think he's doing with the people? He's helping them renew their minds. Now, granted, there are some people who are ignorant. It came a point in time the Mashiach could not say openly, because people were so stupid. And every time the Mashiach was explaining certain layers of the future, they would twist it around. And then came a point, he started talking in parables. Because then Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh perceived in a certain way that these people then truly they are, a bit hard-headed. And those people that then Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was lining up for his service, those people would understand. The others, no. Because their intentions were for money, not for what the transition was taking place. Now, is money important? Of course it's important. Can a person say, a person that has a lot of money is no spiritual? Never heard it. Are there tendencies when a person has a lot of money to do certain things? Yeah, because dealing with the flesh is very dangerous. Doesn't mean a person is no spiritual. Never heard of it. A person with no money can be as spiritual as a person with the money. The only distinction is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So then, Shaliach Shaul is explaining these specific understandings. And he says later on, what estimation you make of yourselves, do likewise to your brothers. And do not indulge in self-proclaimed thoughts. It shows you that people, they were trying to control other people because of their own ways of interpretations. But unite yourselves with the humble-minded. When they understand Hebrew, understand the scriptures, then the situation, that's what he meant. So why some people they want to control the lives of the others for? Now comes the situation of the macho man of the situation. There are people that don't admit that, for instance, the wives have a knowledge of the instructions. Some men, they get absolutely crazy regarding it. They don't admit. Now there are situations that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh uses women. He does, liking it or not. Now, does he use to take the place of a man? That's the distinction. No, it's a complement, part of. But when these part of, speaking of the wife, because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke very cleanly and precisely the duties of a wife. Now, can a man use and abuse and do whatever they want with wives? No. Absolutely not. Let's say, for instance, a husband wants the wife to deal with the situation in a certain way, but if he doesn't provide, for instance, what is normal, he doesn't provide a place, doesn't provide a decent house. He doesn't provide what is required during the hot days, or it's provided in the warm days or cold days. No, can a man expect a wife to act in a certain way? Absolutely not. Now, there are environmental conditions. If a person is in the midst of the jungle, you can expect to have electricity, and the luxuries of electricity. That's basic understanding. So the husband can provide, other than gathering up sticks during the time that's very cold, and try to make a way of not having cold wind coming through. Now, if a person is in the city, a person earns money, and a person doesn't spend wisely, the house is left abandoned like a shack, and expecting to have a wife there to do whatsoever it takes. That's not very wise. How would you be in a relationship with a person that invests the resources elsewhere and then doesn't take care of the house? Does it not? In Proverbs 31st explains very precisely that a wife builds the house. It does not mean that she's going to take bricks and cement and sand and she's going to mix with the water and take a carpenter's position and start building it. That's not what it says. But the relational, emotional section of the home that is so important, this was given this task to the wife. And she's kind of a part of herself. That's why her emotions most often is related with where she lives. Now the husband, however, doesn't understand it. Then he places the wife in a shack with the minimum of understanding, with the minimum of duties, barely has clean water, there is rats around and snails around, termites eating the house, cold air, nearly, frozen conditions, windows broken, busted, wind coming through, and you expect to have a smiley wife at home. And only because Yod-He Vav-He obligates the situation? No, absolutely not. Never was and never shall be. That's negligence of the husband. That's why the Hebrew culture states most often the man would take a wife when he was very old. Very old in our days, for instance, 40 years old, sometimes older. Because he had to work hard, gather up the money, buy a lot and, build a house. And after, when the situation was somewhat organized, then he would take on a wife. I had to have the minimum. Now, is it from Yod-He Vav-He? You grab a wife and you put her in a situation that's very hard? That's torture. It's dictatorship. No, you're going to stay in the house there and, great luck. And then, frozen temperatures? Oh, patience. And then termites are coming from the beams of the house. Oh, always has an excuse. What kind of a husband is this? This is negligence. Now, is the dependency of having a wife in a situation that's absolutely scoundrelly bad, then do you think the husband would build his spiritual life upon a wife in these conditions? It's crazy. So then, when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was talking of this situation, he is talking considering every aspect of life. So Proverbs, the 31st chapter, is extremely important. The Hamashiach ben Yosef or the prophets, they didn't violate those principles. Now, if it's in a jungle, it would be hard for the wife expecting an air conditioning system where there is no electricity. Is it a fault of the husband? No. The condition does not let using an air conditioning system. Some places there are generators. Maybe then you can buy an air conditioning system. But in a normal town, a person has the ability of earning money that doesn't invest in a place where Yod He Vav He precisely said should be invested, and then having many kinds of tabernacling, temple, kingdom understanding, and then the wife at home in a situation that's torturous. So then, the evaluations of these Holy Scripture, it is balanced. When including a family, when including a partner, each partner has either his objectives, the wife have her objectives, and they do not mix. Now, the spiritual understanding most often is related with the husband. However, should not neglect the wife's position. Now, is there a man truly spiritual when the house is coming apart? No. It's not being spiritual whatsoever. In fact, the contrary, is negligent. And then there are many excuses because the personality. No, it's nothing to do with the personality. It has to do with obedience of what Yod He Vav He has said. Building up a house, for instance, is the emotional relation, what it takes to build a family. You have to have the minimum. Now, how are you going to cultivate a relationship where the wife is used as a slave? Never, under any conditions. If a person is stating Yod He Vav He and has any smidge of understanding of the scripture, the man cannot be abusive. Or the wife has every right of coming out of it, because the word of Yod He Vav He was not obeyed. Now, should I have some flexibility? He should. Some of these guys, they are, hard heads. It takes a bit of time of adjusting so a person can learn. Now, if there isn't the minimum of condition of maintaining, then the wife must go elsewhere. Save if she makes a choice of staying in a hard situation, though the integrity of understanding of the spiritual segments of the holy instructions are obeyed. But having a grasp of funding and not doing it, that's negligence. And then the Hamashiach ben Yosef compares later on this understanding with the spiritual condition of the nation. So later on, I'm going to talk more of these. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.